Okay, welcome aboard everyone. It's great to have you here on another Thursday afternoon. This is one of our alternating leadership webinars this afternoon on educational change. I did a bit of reading actually, and I'm always doing a bit of reading about how schools can change for the better. But I specifically in preparation for this did some reading and found a couple of quotes and a couple of things that I was looking for that I thought were really relevant to educational change and why this is a topic that you might have signed up for today. And so I'm just finding out here that my mic's a bit of static, so I'm hoping that's working for you okay within just a few minutes. And we'll see if we can get that back. So my apologies for that. The wonders of technology. So I'm hoping that's working okay for you shortly. If not, I'll do something really technical like try a new USB port or something like that. But the reading that I was looking at was telling me that that in education, one really hit me between the eyes was that education perhaps leads the world as an industry in ignoring its own research. So we find out some really important things need to change, and then we go, yeah, but that's really hard. And so we don't go and take on the critical, what I call reformist change agendas that we really do very much need our schools to embrace. So the webinar this afternoon isn't about how you can go ahead and change one thing or another in your school. It's about some of the principles that sit behind successful change management, and more specifically, what are the principles that sit behind schools take on significant changes. We're talking there about changes that are about the instructional model, about changes in the way people practice, and changes in the way that we get people on board to be able to, across all of our key stakeholders, to embrace change when nobody else is, when perhaps other schools are not rowing in exactly the same direction. So that's to give you a gist of what we're talking about and what we're really going to focus on today. One of the questions that I think is really important that we ask before we get into what to do is that we start to have a look at why is it that educational change is so incredibly difficult. And when you go and have a look at the research and look at the literature about educational change and what the challenges are, there seems to be a top three. There seems to be three things that very much stand out in terms of why people find change in the education sphere such a difficult thing to do. And chiefly, number one is that what we have is a resistance to change that is uninformed. And what I mean by that is we get people who assume some expertise over working in the school merely by virtue of the fact that they went to schools. And they often present to us in the form of parents and also sometimes also in terms of media. So it makes it very difficult for systems, in particular government systems, to change things where have any sort of significance or that are fundamental to the education program that we present, when they can only do so when the changes that they make are seen to be popular. And the populist decision isn't based on expertise. We're the ones with the expertise. So it's really important that we get up and start to communicate our expertise. Whenever I am working with the staff, particularly with a group of leaders, I'm often asking the question, what do you think? What do you think about the status of teachers and the status of school leaders over the last 20 or 30 years? And everybody seems to think we've taken a hit. And what it is because everybody seems to believe that they have the same level of expertise about how to run a successful school that we do. And isn't true. So it's really important that we stand strongly in that expertise and reject the notion that it's a little bit like saying, because I like to use a little colloquialism, but for everybody else, it's a bit like saying that if you're a toilet, that you're a qualified plumber. That's not the case. Having used the system does not make you an expert. What makes you an expert is working in and on the system every day. And so more than anything, in preparing ourselves, in improving our status to be able to make the necessary changes that we're looking to make in our schools, it is critically important that we stand really strongly in our own expertise and we spruik it from the rooftops. We need to start using our assemblies in our newsletters to write a little bit more like the editorial editors of newspapers, so that they can really feel that we're people that are worth partnering with and are worth listening to. We wouldn't go to the dentist and tell our dentist to do their job, but everybody feels inclined that they can tell a teacher or they can tell a school leader how to do their job. So what we're going to need to do is to push back against that uninformed resistance One of the other reasons that schools find change so difficult is that there are such strong existing patterns of practice. There are many, many things in education that we do just because we've always done them. And changing habit out of that can be a really difficult thing to do. I know that myself, in my experience as a school leader, one of the difficult things for me was to change was, for instance, I realised that we were handing out merit awards every week to our students for no real reason other than that's what we'd always done. And they weren't because any students had done anything particularly meritorious. In fact, they were pretty much just waiting for their turn to get a certificate. So it certainly wasn't impacting effort or work ethic or self-esteem in any sort of way. But we were doing it because we always had. But the grief that would have been attached to me moving away from students getting a certificate of assembly would have been very difficult to manage. As a result, I backed away from it. And it's still something that I look back on going, it sticks in my craw. That's something that I should have addressed with much more forthrightness. And it means breaking away from some of those, some of the well-worn patterns in our language that exist as a teaching community. When we say things like, well, this has always worked for us, or why change what it ain't broke? And the why change what ain't broke syndrome is something that we need to be very careful as schools that we're not falling for. And the third thing we want to contend is a real blocker in terms of educational changes. We're just so scared of disrupting everything. We're so scared of turning everything upside down with some really big changes that deep down we know actually need to happen. So what we do is we convince ourselves sometimes that we should play at the edges, and we start to make micro changes when it's that easy to happen. And it leads us to difficulties, for instance, like with the way we've embedded ICT in our classrooms over the last few years. And if you are an avid reader, I've got to try and make sure that we change the way we do our webinar today. And if you look to do things differently today, so one of the things that we're going to do is to provide you with some handouts today. And one of those handouts you'll be able to see in the handout section. I'll refer to that in just a moment. We're going to refer to some links and some resources today. We want you to have them. One such resource you might want to consider, and I am really delighted because I do see this on the bookshelves of many principals as I meet in their offices, is a book called Disrupting Class by Clayton Christensen. And what he talks about is the way that we haven't used technology to actually transform the instructional model. So we have crammed in computers into our classrooms to pretty much suit the existing model of teacher delivering content, sort of the method of the milkman, where we've got something special that we know and we want to distribute it to you, and we find some really cool gags to help us distribute it, but the model is still the same, we're still distributing content. So he talks about, Christensen and his co-author there, Michael Horn, whose TED Talk you can check out. There's an absolute ripper into the TED. He's done a few TED Talks, Michael Horn. But I really liked this one from quite a few years ago now that he did at the TEDx event in Peachtree. And I talked about, for instance, how we've brought in PowerPoint as a tool for our students to use to give a presentation. But other skills and the thinking really any different when you're looking to deliver a PowerPoint than they are when you're looking to draw up a poster. And they ask other skills in the thinking any different when we use Microsoft Word than they were when we were perhaps even using a typewriter. So it's critically important that we that we start to think about, can we use it to a I'm just thinking some of the problems here might be that I haven't shown you my screen. I do apologise, guys. I'm hoping that might have picked up some of the technological difficulties that we might have been having along the trip there. So what we're asking ourselves is, can we use technology to disrupt the instructional model and move forward from there? Great resources to get our heads around. All right, now that I think we've got our technological issues all sorted out, I want to just point out that we want today to be a really interactive session. So you're in control of your control panel that you've got there. You'll notice a couple of key things that you can do. One is that you can use the question box. Okay, and I can see that that Danielle's getting she's got a bit of problem with the audio too. So I'm hoping that it's starting to sort itself out, Danielle. Chris is going to have a bit of a look at in the background here, our wonderful business manager, at checking whether the audio is working well enough for everybody. So let Chris know in that question box if there's something that we need to be attending to around audio. Another way that you can participate in this webinar today is to put your hand up. So you'll see more towards the top of your control panel that there's a hand up section. And we'll be asking you to at any time you want today, to put your hand up if you think we've hit a difficulty. And I'm just finding out that we've got real audio problems now. So I'm going to at least start with the first step, so just plugging into a different port. So thank you, guys. And I don't know if my audio is any better now, but let me know if perhaps it is or isn't, and we'll move on from there. This happens from time to time with the old GoToWebinar software. Seem to be getting an idea that this might have been fixed now. A bit clearer. Funny how one port can make all the difference. Okay, so just coming back into the webinar now. Thanks for your patience, guys. I really appreciate it. This can happen from time to time. So just remember that today, that you can actually participate by asking a question in the question box, and Chris is going to alert me when the opportunity comes along to answer some of those questions. And also, I'm going to give you the opportunity to put your hand up, and that means we might be able to unmute you as we go forward, and we'll be able to hear your question as we go as well. So one of the things I do want to put to you is that this is a dangerous space, this whole idea of leading educational change. And to be honest, some people don't have the stomach for it. Some people get to the edge of the high wire and say we need to, they want to turn around and go back, and they don't want to make the big changes. So I do want to give you that opportunity today, I guess. To be honest, if you feel that this isn't what you're looking for today, and you're not prepared to make some of the big changes that need to be made in education, then I do suggest strongly to you that turning around and going back isn't a bad idea. So give that some thought now. This is not for the faint-hearted, people who want to take on educational change of some sort of significance, because all of the tips and pointers today are going to be about how you can make the big changes and not how you can make those micro changes at the edge of a really significant change agenda. So the first thing, as we always would like to do, is to make sure that we sorry, I'm still having some difficulty here, guys. I'm going to just head back in to the control panel here. And I think we're back on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out a little bit about you and your reasons for being here today. So the first thing I want to find out is, from a leadership perspective, what's your view of the landscape here? I want to find out what's the cohort of leaders and potential leaders that we have in the room are. So a quick poll up there, guys. And I'm looking for you to just let me know what's your role at the moment. Are you a principal or a system leader? Are you an AP? Are you in that senior, that middle management sort of role? Are you someone who would like to be a leader? You're thinking about stepping into that space. If you come to us today with a teaching background as in that role. So we want like to make sure when we do a poll here to get a bit of an idea. It's my little way of doing a little bit of differentiation in the room today. So if we can get that figure up to, maybe around 80%, then I'll close that poll off. It's good at the moment. We're already nudging 60, so most people may be familiar with us being able to use this, using this feature of a webinar. So I'll give you a few more seconds, those who haven't chosen, to let me know what's really happening here, and then I'm going to close this poll and show you the results. Terrific stuff. Okay, we'll close that. I'll share those results. And as you can see, we're half of the people in the room are teachers today, and thinking about how we can contribute to that big change agenda from below, so to speak. And then we've got a good smattering of other people in different roles in the room. So I'm going to keep that in mind as we move forward today. And then in the next slide, what I want to do is get an idea of what you think of what are the blockers for you. We talked about what the barriers to change are when we what are the barriers sort of more broadly across schools, but that might not necessarily be the reason that you're here today. So we listed some potential barriers in the description for this webinar. And one of some of them are, for instance, things like establishing buy-in from resistant staff. Is that the thing that you find most difficult? Is it fear of criticism from parents? Is it the absence of a consistent change management approach? A lot of people sort of take upon change agendas, sort of a bit like flying the plane while you build it, instead of stopping and going, okay, what's our methodology here for change management? Some people, they have the real thing that's in the way is that there's a strong attachment in my school to history or to traditional practices. And the other one is that there are restrictions or mandates that come from above. Is that the thing that's stopping you? There's so much that you have to do from above that doesn't either fit with the change agenda or doesn't leave room for the changes that you're wanting to make. And I'm watching some of the votes starting to come through now, and I'm finding some of the answers very, very interesting. So have a think about those 5 for me. And we've got more than 50% of the people in the room now who voted. So we'll just give you a few more seconds to let us know what your real reason for being here is. And I'll close that poll now, I think, and share those results, which is interesting that nearly half of the people are saying we just don't have a consistent way of managing the changes. So it's a bit like we try to reinvent the wheel all the time. Every time we try to do something new, getting our resistant staff involved in the change process and getting buy-in, having them understand and think that this is a good idea is also important. And then we've got some stuff that we're attached to that we really need to address. So I'm going to hide those results there, and let's move on with the bulk of our webinar. Let's really get our hands dirty. It's really important when we start out that we have a really good look at our own attitude to change. I love this little slide that was put together by Galvanize, and they encourage us to think about the positive ways that we can start to view change. So, for instance, my favourite quote on here is almost undoubtedly Jimmy Dean's quote that I can't change the direction of the wind, but I can adjust my sails to all roads reach my destination. That's probably my favourite one there. So I'm wondering a bit of your question box if one of them really stands out to you. Would you be able to just put the author's name in that question box, give me an idea of how you try to go about choosing your positive attitudes change. Because there's a challenge around choosing our positive attitude to change, and that is that not everybody shares our positive attitude. So, unfortunately, when asked, would you rather work for change or just complain, 81% of respondents said, I have to pick which is hard. So this is sometimes the attitude that we're trying to get straight as we move forward. So it's just finding out that the audio is still not working 100%. So I don't know if it's going to work very well if I take even if I unplug the headset for today. But let's give it a try, eh? Let's keep working, and if plan B is that we go back to where we're currently at with the audio, we'll see. So can I just check in if people can still hear me? Could you give me a quick yes in the question box there if you can hear me right now, and if the audio is in fact any better? So I've got a message from Chris saying that the audio is not too bad. When I take the old headset off, we might have a problem. We might have a headset issue there. I can see here that, yes, much clearer, sounds good. All right, I'm going to put the headphones away and give that a miss for today. Got here that Alan likes that William James quote about change has to work from the inside out. Deepak Chopra gets a run with Scott there. I can see, I think Deepak's one is probably the one that's most chosen by a lot of people. So I'm glad to hear we've got the audio right now, and that cannot be in the way of our learning any further as we move forward. All right, so what I want to put to you today is 12 different leadership principles that I think we need to keep in mind. And I think that what we also need to do is to categorise some of these leadership principles, and I've done that under 3 key headings. So when it comes to leadership and thinking about leading the change agenda, I've actually been really impressed lately by the new Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. A couple of things he says really resonate with me. He says that we beat fear with hope, we beat cynicism with hard work, we beat negative, divisive politics with a position that brings Canadians together. I really like that, and what he's doing when he does that, he's very much communicating the vision. So he's letting us know what the mission is, what's the thing. This is about establishing the why. And he says also that change starts with transparency. And there's many things that Trudeau's getting criticised for as well. There's no political leader that's always 100% popular with the electorate. But what he does incredibly well is let people know why he thinks things need to change. So what we need to do is start thinking about how we can deliver
the big why first, how we can get people motivated to change. This is about, goes directly to the people who answered that they were interested in how to get people on board. The first thing we want to do if we're trying to get people on board is to be able to not tell them what they need to do or how they need to do it. We need to tell them why things need to be done differently. And Trudeau does that incredibly well. And if you think even about a coach, of a sporting team, the coach doesn't give the pep talk too late. They give the pep talk before the game's played, before they have to do the execution. And so it is critically important that we actually do a little bit of work on why the change agenda is important. You hear about people who say, that, on my personal little definition for leadership is that it's about mobilising people behind a vision. And that means, it reminds me that the first job is to mobilise. The second job is to make sure that they're standing up behind the right vision. We're trying to get people up and standing behind a vision that something can be better. And when you look at other quotes from great leaders like Norman Schwarzkopf, another one that's a favourite of mine, he says that leadership's a combination of character and strategy, but if you must be without one, be without the strategy. So he's telling us to think about our own character and think about how people feel about following us before we actually talk about what the change agenda might be. The second thing from a leadership perspective that's critically important is that we identify the solid base for change. I want to put to you that the word innovation is broken. The notion that what we need to do out there is innovate more in schools, I think is making people cringe. I think most of the people on our staffs have now come to believe that innovation is about additional workload, or it's about the fact they need to change because something's wrong with them, and that's not necessarily the case at all. So what we want to do is to be able to show people, first of all, the things that are not going to change, and we want to celebrate them along the way and make them the solid platform for a new change. Give people something to stand on while they move forward, rather than thinking everything that they have been doing requires things being changed. The next thing that great leaders do is that they lead from the front, which means that what we need to do is to be very visible in the way that we are going to be the first one to change. Now, this sounds a little bit phony sometimes, because the truth is that tokenism, when it comes to leadership, sometimes counts. Being seen to be the person who does a fantastic job, or being seen to be the first person that puts a particular strategic objective first, really does make a difference in terms of other people falling in behind you, or even better, stepping up to assist you with it. I think back to one of the great leaders that I worked with, and a fellow who's unfortunately no longer with us, called Greg Jarvis, who was a principal at Malden Park School in the Northern Territory. And what most people in that community remember Greg for was not the brilliant work that he did. And he did some really great work there. But what they remember him for was the fact that every single morning, rain, hail or shine, Greg was at the front of the school in a hat that was just way too big for him. It looked, far more like a sombrero than a sun hat. But he was out there greeting everyone and helping them across the driveway, which could be a bit of a slightly dangerous thoroughfare. And his idea was that, Greg said that, his big vision for the school was that Malden School was the home of happy children. And he just made sure that there was a happy encounter as they arrived at school, as someone helped them across the driveway. It was incredibly clever strategy, and it's demonstrated for everybody that Greg led that whole idea of the home of happy children from the front. People saw Greg do that. It wasn't the most important thing he did, but it was certainly the most visible, and it served him well in achieving his strategic intent. And last one here that's really important is to facilitate what we call emergent phenomenon, which means that while we are going to lead change in our school, we're not going to lead it from a solely top-down perspective. A fantastic example of it, if you're interested at all in it, is the TED Talk by Shugata Mitra, who talks about, over more than 500,000 people have viewed this TED Talk now, and that's just on the YouTube site, let alone on the TED website. But Shugata talks about a fascinating little piece where what he did was he went and took some technology that was fully put together in English, so just a computer. It only had one piece of software on there, which was about biotechnology, and he put that in a classroom of students who were only Tamil-speaking students. And what Shugata said was that he wants to prove that teachers are really important, and the kids won't learn anything unless with there's a teacher there to guide them through something that they don't understand. And that was a great hypothesis. And there's a really great quote in this TED Talk where he goes back to the students after a month and says, "Did you use the technology?" And they said, "Yes, we use it every day." And they said, and he said, "Did you learn anything?" And they said, "No, we learned nothing." And he was just about to walk out of the room when a student said to him, "Apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes genetic disease, we've learned absolutely nothing." And he realised that what happens sometimes, particularly from a learning and leadership perspective, is that sometimes it's just about creating the conditions, sometimes it's just about creating the tools and getting out of the way. One of my favourite examples of great emergent phenomena was certainly when I had the privilege of opening a large new primary school. We had a co-teaching environment. We were bringing in restorative practices. We had a commitment to Kagan cooperative learning. We wanted there to be a strong evidence base. In our early childhood area, there was also a commitment to the play-based or inquiry approach. We didn't get the keys to the classroom until 48 hours before the students arrived, and I told the teachers, the two teachers who were working together there, fabulous couple of teachers called Karen and Lara, that you know, do what you need to do, but you know, that's got to tick all these boxes. And what they had produced over that weekend when the students arrived on the Monday morning was something that I certainly could not have imagined. I couldn't have designed it myself. It required their expertise and their opportunity to be creative. And what they did was remarkable, and I'm really, really pleased for them. So it's hugely important sometimes that we create the tools, we provide the tools, and we get out of the way and let people do some really remarkable things to be more effective leaders. So we're going to provide you the links for those in the handouts. So I'll refer to those a little bit later and make sure you've got an opportunity to do a little download from there. So they're our first 4 principles, and they're around leadership. And then it's about the local issue here, which is, can we pay attention to how the local and the unique context is contributing to our change agendas? Many new programs, when we try to bolt on a new program in our schools, fail, despite the fact that we've looked over the fence and we've seen another school who's doing a really fabulous job with this and they seem really happy and they're getting some terrific results. I think we should do that. We bring it into our environment and then it fails miserably and we leave ourselves wondering why, and perhaps even sometimes issuing some unnecessary and unhelpful blame out there. So one of the things that we do want to start to do is to say, can we pay attention to some very key principles that are very much about the local environment to make sure that we are getting giving our programs and our interventions the best chance to actually take root and to have the impact that we're looking for. The first change principle operationally I want you to consider is whether there are any policy or practice discrepancies that are happening in the school. Gaps are contagious. So, and any time we have tolerated gaps, they're less likely to be about that particular policy than they are about power in the school. So what I mean by that is we might have a policy that we don't, for instance, we don't have detention in the school. But if we do have a couple of teachers that go, well, that's not the way I like it to be and I'm going to be keeping kids in, and they do it, and we don't address that gap in practice between practice and policy, it's not about detention. This one's about power. And what happens when there are gaps in practice and policy is that they become contagious. And there is an element when it comes to being a strong leader of knowing that sometimes when it comes to gaps that it's about give an inch and take a mile. And we have to be really clear that when we write policy, it must be evident in practice. A great school leader that I know always said, Adam, if it ain't happening in the classroom, it ain't happening. So we need to be really clear about that. So make sure that there aren't any existing gaps in policy and practice before we embark upon whole new change agendas. The next one to think about is the climate or the cultural contribution of the school. My working definition of culture is simply that it's a set of behaviours, and it's a set of behaviours that we both encourage and that we tolerate. So we need to think about the trends that exist in terms of what behaviours we're seeing regularly in our school. If you go back to even DeBono's hats and think about what's my proportion of black hatters who might jump on any change issue and find all the problems with it before we get started, and what's been the lessons learned from previous attempts to change big things in our school? What was the thing that got in the way then? And can we differentiate our approach a little bit? I always remember a really fantastic teacher who I was working with. And I say fantastic really genuinely, even though she was driving me completely crazy. Because every time I decided I was going to change something, I wanted to communicate it very clearly at the staff meeting. I would do that. I would prepare very carefully, but she would shoot it down. And I really was driving me crazy because, de bono-wise, she was my quintessential black hatter, but I just couldn't stop her being a black hatter when I introduced that change. But what it was really about was, as a black hatter, this teacher didn't like being ambushed with change agendas. So I learned to differentiate my approach for delivering change. And so what I did was I always emailed this teacher about 3 days before the staff meeting saying, I'm thinking of doing this. I think it's really important. This is why I think it needs to change. I really value your opinion. Do you see any issues that I would need to address? Usually a day or two before. It would take a day or two before until I would get a response by email. But I would have some highlighted in red comments that I needed to keep in mind. And by the time I actually presented it at the staff meeting, it was almost like there was some shared ownership of this change leadership, this leading change agenda, and this change that we wanted to make. And it wasn't that my teacher that I had there disagreed with everything I did. It was just that she didn't believe that she was a part of the process. So behavioural, I just needed to differentiate the way that change reached her, which was really important. The next change principle I'm going to give to you right now is the one that I want to just declare and lay myself bare before you, if I might, that this is my worst one. This is the principle that I struggle with the most, which is to control expectations. I am a principal who will stand up in front of my people and communicate a wonderful mission that will have them feel that they are going to be in educational Tahiti, and it will take no time and it will be incredibly easy, and they'll be very excited, and then I leave the room. And a lot of people are sitting behind me going, oh wow, that sounds great, but what are we going to do now? And when the people who were in that room are my strongest advocates, and then within about 3 weeks we aren't actually in educational Tahiti, and the problems haven't been fixed, and we're still only very much in our initial phases, they then become people who actually have lost trust in me. And so they're then the people who are the biggest anchors on the change agenda, when only a short period of time previously they were my biggest advocates. So really important to make it clear for people how long we believe that our change agenda is going to take root, and how long it's going to take until we get positive results from that. It's also really important to mark out for people on a bit of a timeline the milestones, and to make sure that when we hit those milestones we celebrate them. People are incredibly motivated by the scoreboard when it comes to progress, and being able to see that progress happen. And if we're going to do something big, sometimes we'll get a dip in our outcomes while we make the change. We go through that, as Tuckman would say, our forming, storming and norming sort of process, and we don't get the outcomes that we're looking for immediately. It takes time. And so when people hit key markers in improvement, either in terms of outcome or in the process of implementing change, we need to celebrate that, and we need to make sure that they see the progress. It motivates us to continue. And the last one is a little bit like the emerging phenomena aspect. What it's really about is saying, can I also, while I might be leading from the top when it comes to change, can I also be involved, or can I also be creating structures in my school that facilitate people contributing from the bottom up? Can we have a grassroots change agenda start to exist? So my example for that was that I remember implementing restorative practices in one of my schools, and being very, very proud of my implementation plan, which had beautiful coloured columns and rows on it, and all the actions we're going to take, and all the targets we were going to hit. It was going to be fantastic. Until about 3 of my staff members came to me and said, Adam, what about us? I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you've got a column there for professional learning, you've got a column for the community, you've got a column for behaviours in the playground and the classroom, you've got a column for programming and planning. Where's the column about how we become a restorative staff? And I really was tempted to say, well, yeah, but look at a great plan. But the truth was that I would have been eliminating an opportunity for them to do something from the bottom up that was really important. And what they wanted to institute was the opportunity for the staff to check in. We were doing a lot of check-ins with our students, and I was saying, what about us? When are we going to do that? And I, as the principal, over the next term or so, took some, being the data-driven person in the school, took some data on how many people showed up to 3 weekly 7:40 a.m. check-in circles for the staff, and it ran at 70%. which was just fantastic. And I think that if I had have put 70, let's do 3 by 7:40 a.m. staff check-in circles in my original beautifully coloured plan, I don't think I would have got anywhere near 70%. And it was because it came from the top. That would have come from the top and not from the bottom. It wasn't the idea that achieved 70%. It was the fact that it came from the bottom. And we need to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to do that. So Michael Fullen, as Alwyn points out, Michael Fullen talks about change comes from the top down and the bottom up, not either or. And it's almost like, Alwyn, you've led me into the next little thing that I want to talk about here. I've got a white paper that I'd really love you to be able to download. And the two key people that Sally Boyd has referenced in this white paper, if you look in the handout section, you'll be able to download this. Michael Fullen, who, as Alwyn points out, Michael Fullen refers to the fact that no change agenda has been particularly successful from the top down, and none has been successful from the bottom up. We need something that's a more sophisticated architecture than that, and we need to think a little bit more about restructuring the way we go about change in that regard, and actually train our school leaders and train everybody around us in the leadership positions to understand some of that more sophisticated architecture for the way that works. So Fullen is referred to very regularly in this report. I really encourage you, if today's webinar is resonating with you, to download that from the handout section and to have a really good read of that. The other author that is referred to really regularly in this report is Peter Senge, who was the author of The Fifth Discipline. And Senge looks less at schools than he does about organisations that are capable of learning. And he says that one of the things that where organisations collectively improve their learning commitment is what they do. What they do is they're very able to learn through what he calls systems thinking. Now, systems thinking is about being able to identify and understand that not only am I responsible and capable for learning, but the things that I learn and the things that I improve are also going to be impacting on other people in the system. And they then not only choose to improve their own performance, but they choose to learn and improve in areas that improve the performance of the entire system. And that's when we get really strong collective improvement. So really great references to some really smart people, particularly Fullen and also Senge in that report, and provide that for you as a resource today. The last set of principles that I want to bring to your attention today, I think, are critically important and probably the most often ignored, and they are the personal change principles. The first one of which is to actually have a little think about, are we involved in positive conversations, or are we only focused on formally delivering a very inspiring mission to our people? Unfortunately, there have been far too many very worthy change agendas that have died at the water cooler. And it's because leaders sometimes present a vision, we provide the documentation, we put the action plan in place, but then we get into the staff room at morning and tea and we go, man, I really don't know about this. And it undoes all of the motivation that our people might have already had to step up behind the formal work that we've done. So critically important that really great leaders understand their personal influence. We'll talk about that a little bit in a moment, but also that in terms of constructing positive conversations, we just have that little bit of Lego movie about us. We have that little bit of, if you're a little out of the Lego movie vintage, then think Pollyanna, where everything is awesome, everything is wonderful, everything's going to be fine. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm excited and enthusiastic about it, even though underneath we might be a tiny bit nervous. It's important that people feel and experience our enthusiasm rather than our trepidation when we're thinking about our personal influence over change. When we are examining a little more closely our personal influence, it's really important that people are understanding and experiencing some of the positive attitude that we're choosing, and that they're experiencing that in a very consistent way, that we're not one day up about our change agenda and then the next day that we've actually, really, I don't know about this, but let's see what it's like tomorrow and give it another go. We've got to be very consistent about the way we do that. It's a bit like some of the schools sometimes you see where we've got, we're not going to yell at students, but the principal has reserved the right to be able to chastise and yell above other people. And the age of do as I say and not as I do in schools is dead. We grant permission for people to deviate from the essence of any change when we deviate ourselves. So we have to be very clear that we are the ones who are demonstrating some of the changes that we need to do in our own behaviour and the way that we're moving forward. The third one I want you to think about is to identify any resistance in ourselves and in others. So when it comes to ourselves, the great part about that is that opportunities exist before the change starts. And that gives us a chance to fill knowledge gaps. So I remember myself, when I was a principal, and two teachers came to me, senior teachers and leaders in the school, who wanted to implement a cooperative learning approach. They gave me a 2-hour presentation, which was fantastic. It all seemed like a great idea, but I just felt as a leader that there was some resistance from my part because I didn't really understand the content well enough. And so what I needed to do was to spend a little bit of time making sure that I filled that knowledge gap so that I could actually step confidently and over that resistance into leading people into a really worthy change. And in others, it's really important that we deal with any perceived resistance to the change agenda really quickly, and that we do it where possible individually. We need to not fall for the trap of making this an us against me mentality, because there's always fewer leaders in the school, and we don't want a competitive environment starting to creep over the top of our change agenda. What we do want to do is individually give people the opportunity to have something very informal called a conversation built around what it is that's causing this resistance, and then can we potentially fill gaps for them so that they too can get to the stage where they feel like they're stepping over that resistance and into a contribution to the change agenda. The last thing to remember, this is a really important conceptual point when you're looking to try and change, is that we need to remember that teams don't change. No team changes just because we simply decided that a group of people, we could actually impact their behaviour and get them to implement. It's only people that do. So it's knowing that changing of whole groups is basically impossible, and what we need to do is to get out there and change our people and change their behaviour and change their practices one by one. And that sometimes means finding our champions. Find our people that are most likely to come along with us on the change journey, find them, invest in them, get them on side, have them out there doing the really fabulous work of creating those positive conversations and having a strong personal influence on others. If you look back to, for instance, one of the really clever but also slightly insidious methods that was used quite a few years ago was by Nintendo when they made the Game Boy, and they decided to step in and help schools by trying to identify which kids in the school had the highest levels of social status and which kids in the school were the most influential. And they gave schools some really interesting data around that. They also kept the data themselves, and what they decided was to take the most influential students and give them a Game Boy. And lo and behold, once the most influential student has a Game Boy, everyone else wants a Game Boy. So what it's about is identifying for ourselves the same kind of theory. Who are our people who can be the most influential, and how do we position them as champions of this change principle so it doesn't feel like such a top-down agenda sometimes. Now, when we are going to change, it is critically important too, we're going to move on from those 12 principles there, but it is critically important also that we start to have a little think about which are the areas that are going to be the most difficult to change. And I would suggest to you that when it comes to change in schools, we have an enemy. And unfortunately, I think it's Tracy Grimshaw. And what I think that's about is that Tracy is more than happy to try and position our parents to be in opposition to us. She's trying to make sure that everybody feels that they're a high-level expert on education, and therefore they've got every right to throw a rock at somebody like you who might try to do something significant in changing the way that we do education. And it's really important that we're very clear about the areas that Tracy and her ilk, obviously it's not just Tracy, are the most interested in when it comes to change. So I want you to be aware of the media's top 5 here, if media and criticism is something that you think is going to be holding you back. And when it comes to that, the first one is that they're interested in student behaviour. Now, it's inclusive of student behaviour. They're interested in students behaving really badly or bizarrely, and they want to report on that. They're also interested in staff that do terrible things. Bullying is a topic for them that they're particularly interested in, and now as a subset of that is cyberbullying. So they lump all of that together in the notion of behaviour. So changing in the the field or the domain of improving student behaviour and using best practice rather than things that we've always done or that worked perhaps 30 years ago but not now is always difficult, and we're going to need to over-communicate those changes and really structure to build a change agenda that works. Number 2 is nutrition, so just try selling a can of Red Bull in your canteen and see whether Tracy Grishaw wants to find out about your school. Number 3 is uniform, and what I mean by that is if you're going to suspend a student for having a satanic lip ring, you better make sure that you have specific reference to satanic lip rings in your policy. They're very, very interested in uniform at a current affair. These obviously, you realise, are not perhaps our core business, it's theirs, and this is why these change agendas sometimes creep up on us. They're interested in standards, but only declining standards. So specifically what they're talking about there is NAPLAN standards, our Year 12 scores, whatever the acronym is for your state or territory around that at the moment. And they're also really interested in how we're performing internationally and can we find some bad data. They're not particularly interested in improvements, but they are interested in some bad data around that. And then the last one's homework. They're very, very interested in what your policy is on homework, particularly if it deviates from the norm, and I found this out the hard way. When I was the principal at Rosebery Primary School, I had the wonderful opportunity to deliver a TED talk on how you open a brand new school. I titled it The Importance of How, which was we're going to focus on how we do education, not what we're going to do. I often get a few laughs in the room when I ask people, do they think that the big issue in education is that we just need one more curriculum review? And they tend to think, oh, actually, I don't think that's it. I think that the issue is not what we teach, it's how we go about the art of education. And so I gave a bit of a TED talk on that, which was really exciting. And what I didn't know was there was a reporter in the audience. That reporter wanted to interview me on the radio. I was very nervous, but I did the interview on the radio. And then another reporter heard the interview on the radio and wanted to have a chat to me. And this reporter was from the interesting publication called the Territory News, which is famous for its front covers, and you tend to need to be one of the 5 C's to be in the front cover of the NT News. You need to. I bet Danielle's laughing at the moment about this one. You need to be you need to be a criminal. You need to be a cop. You need to be a cane toad. You need to be a cyclone, or you need to be a crocodile. And so it's not exactly highbrow journalism. And I was a bit nervous about doing the interview with the NT News, but the media person from the education department said that I should because they were probably going to rip me apart anyway. I went, okay. So I did the interview very nervously, but it went really well. And I got up the next day quite pleased that it hadn't been a terrible interview. And I thought I should drop into the service station and grab the NT News because perhaps there'll be a headline on about page 8 that says innovative school leads the way or something like that. And I was very distraught when I went into the service station and picked up this front page. And my world as a leader fell apart. For the next 2 weeks, it felt like this is all I dealt with, as many nasty comments were made about me and my school in this article, which was syndicated to every state and territory around Australia. It made its way to New Zealand, it made its way to Malaysia, to South Africa, to Canada, to the Philippines, and to Japan. And there were even Facebook groups set up to say some pretty nasty things about me personally and my school. And I was thinking that I'd bitten off a change agenda that I couldn't handle. I was very, very stressed for a couple of weeks. But at the end of 2 weeks, I sat down and I thought, wow, what happened here? What was really the fallout? What's the damage here? And I realised that in that 2-week period, I'd had 2 parents who came into my office and they said, Adam, explain to me the homework thing again. And I did. And they said, yeah, I thought so. And they left. And that was the entire impact locally. You see, the mess was external. But internally, we had very clearly communicated why our homework policy needed to be different at our new school. We had communicated to everybody how it would be different, and we had communicated to them what the practical implications of that would be, and they were right on board. And I went and had a look back through the articles online and the Facebook groups. I saw that the nasty comments were punctuated by parents who were writing things like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. This is why we enrolled our kids in the school. You guys don't know what you're talking about. The principal told us about this at our enrolment meeting and at the first assembly. You guys don't know what you're talking about. The policy was in the first 3 newsletters at the school. And I was so heartened, and to this day I am, about the fact that it's one of the times that I can remember in my educational career, an entire parent community that really rallied and stood up and mobilised in support of its school without being asked to do so. They just knew that they'd been sold on the way, and they wanted to be proud of the changes that their community was making. I'm also really proud that, despite the fact that there was some external mess, there are many, many schools now around that school who have a very similar homework policy. So it does spread, and sometimes it takes one school like yours who's prepared to stand out the front and to let a few bullets bounce off the man of steel. And once they go away, there's plenty of room for us to do some fantastic things, not only in your school, but in other schools. So one of the messages that I want to leave you with today is about what are the things that we should be looking to change. And like I said to you at the beginning of the webinar today, this isn't about micro changes. And when I even think about my homework change, I actually think that was a micro change. My problem was I didn't know that it was one of Daisy Grimshaw's top 5 and would get a lot more attention. But what I do want you to start to think about it from your point of view is, how can we make the big changes? How could I be a reformist leader? How could I be a leader that actually leads the way in doing things like changing the instructional model? Could I actually now be the school leader that says, you know what, I'm going to step into the space of using video, not to show the students an interesting clip on YouTube, but I'm going to record my very best teachers who are guns at teaching certain content, and can I start to create a library of content that the students could actually view over and over and over again, and position my teachers as coaches in the classroom and actually flip the learning model a little bit that way? Could I actually invest in the practice of our teachers more effectively than I am investing potentially in implementing new programs, overcrowding our broader program and leaving our teachers feeling stressed and ineffective? You know, we've got a problem. We've got a problem, and the problem is that about 1 in 5 of our teachers leaves the profession within the first 3 years. We've also got a problem. We've got the highest vacancy rates on principal positions that we've ever had. So it comes back to how we do our teaching, so that we can get better at that. People can feel more effective and less stressed. That looks after our profession and positions us as experts. And that means leading a practice-based revolution rather than a program-based revolution. And the other one I want you to really think about is, how can I actually make sure that my change agenda is locally supported? What would I need to do? What would the communication plan need to be? I always say, if you're going to implement restorative practices in your school, you don't need a communication plan. You need an over-communication plan. We need to make sure that we communicate with our parents and our community at a ridiculous high level on multiple channels, so that they can really feel that they're going to step up and be mobilised in our support even when we don't ask for it. So reformist leaders are ones who understand that Tracy Grimshaw isn't about to start helping us from a broad perspective. The bottom up, what we've got here, what we need here is a grassroots, locally supported revolution in education, and your school can be the first if you decide that you're going to make that decision for yourself. All right, that brings us pretty much to the end of our content today. There's a couple of other things I want to cover with you today. I know that I've moved incredibly quickly today. Number one is that I had a great time this week. I got out to I've been to about 50 kilometres out of Kalgoorlie in Western Australia to a new partner school at Kambalda West District High School. It's a school that is a Peter 12 school, and they're doing an incredible job. And I was just so excited to get out there with a young staff who just soaked up the professional learning and soaked up the work that we did in the classroom with the students as well. There was part of that part B. The principal out there, Denise Delphs, is very interested in a practice-based revolution in her school. And if that's of interest to you and doing that kind of work, we I guess I mentioned Kambalda because we actually really want you to know that we will work with any school who's prepared to work with real schools, and we've got about 47 schools in active partnerships now around Australia, and we're proud of each and every one of them. If you're interested in a coffee, get school leaders around, or even a chat on Skype or on the phone about partnership for your school, then just in the question box there, just whack the word partnership. There's no obligation involved in that. But if you think that the kinds of things we're talking about today, working together over 1, 2 or 3 years to get some of the change that you're looking for in your school would be of benefit, just pop the word partnership in there and we'll make that work for you. And if the notion of a practice-led revolution is something that works for you and that you're interested in, we really want to bring your attention to our Teacher FastTrack program. We've got our Teacher FastTrack program. We sort of piloted it 12 months ago. So we've got our first group of graduates coming through. I asked them for some testimonial. I sent one out in in a newsletter this week, and if you're on the newsletter list, you may have seen. But we had another one come through that I just wanted to quickly read to you today so you can hear the kind of feedback we're getting from schools who are actually taking on that practice-led revolution. And this one says that I enjoyed the flexibility of doing the TFT modules each month in my own time. Doing a TFT module each month allowed me to apply, practice, and experiment with the techniques and ideas from each module during the month. Sometimes I watch the video several times during the month to reinforce the ideas and the techniques. TFT reinforces that relationships are the most important part of learning. I learned to be more relaxed in the classroom. I worry less about the work being carried out and more about relationships. I discovered that when the relationships are right, the work and the learning take care of itself. I started this year thinking, wow, I have great classes this year. Then I listened to other teachers complaining about their classes with the same students. I realised that the classes were no different. What was different was me and the relationships I had with my students. Now, what we've done after a bit of an expensive process of setting up the Teacher Fast Track is now that it's up and running and everything, all the modules are designed, we think we're in a position to offer you a great way to get involved in that. So we cut the price in half. You can get your teachers in your school involved in a 12-month journey of improving their practice, just like that testimonial that I read out there from Roberts McCubbin Primary School. Actually, no, it's from Janet White in South Australia. And if you would like to have that sort of experience for your teachers, we'd love to send you the prospectus, and you can get 12 months of commitment for your teachers for just $475, which we think is a ridiculous price for being able to access these modules, to have a local mentor who sees all of the reflection questions, to have a coaching component as well that sits within that. So if you would like to get the prospectus in your email inbox, we'd be really happy to send it to you. Just put TFT in the question box, and we're going to flick you a copy of that, and we'll follow up just to make sure, see if it's something that you would like to do to try and help your school. I mentioned today also that we had some critical links. So if you look in the handout section again, we had the white paper that I mentioned earlier on around access to be able to that you can access to be able to follow up on today and to try and embed your learning a little deeper. You can see there's a link to be able to purchase Disrupting Class. You can see Michael Horn's TED Talk, Shikata Mitra's TED Talk, Justin Trudeau explaining quantum computers, which I just think is just awesome, a great example of a leader who actually knows his stuff. Sally Boyd's white paper, we've got the link for that if you're for any reason having difficulty accessing it as a handout. And also my own TED Talk, the importance of how, if you want to go and have a look at that, you're more than welcome to also. And you know what, guys, I think that pretty much leaves us at the end. Oh, I pressed on the wrong link accidentally there. So make sure you go and have a look on Real Schools and have a surf around if you think we can help you in any way. Contact us if you think that that's something that you'd like to, just have a chat about. And then the last thing I wanted to point out to you is that our next webinar is, as always, going to be a teacher webinar. We've done a leadership one today, and the next webinar that we're going to do is for our teachers. And it's really, and I don't plan these too far ahead in advance. And the one thing that I'm hearing a lot about lately is how do we teach our kids to be more empathic? They just don't seem to care. And so I've got some key strategies that I've been using in classrooms in our partner schools lately, and we're going to send you, with your follow-up email from today, the link that will show your teachers how to get started with the notion of teaching empathy. And we just wanted to bring that to attention and encourage you that if you think any of your teachers would benefit from that, completely free webinar, as always. We're going to hold that one on Thursday, the 7th of July. Now, we know that for some schools that might be in holiday period, or it might be in the last week of term or something like that. We're going to whack it on anyway, and sometimes that works well for people and sometimes it doesn't. So if it doesn't, just encourage your people to register anyway, because the truth is they will get access to the link recording it, even if they happen to be sitting in Bali and with sand between their toes sipping on a margarita. So I encourage them to get involved so they've got that as a resource for themselves as they move forward. And I think that leaves us right near the end. Now, I do want to see, is there anybody else who has a question? If you do, feel free to either put your hand up. I saw some comments that were in there. I don't want to be Tony Jones on Q&A on you, Alwyn, in particular, because making some terrific contributions there. I'm just saying, Alan's asked, should we be couching our agendas more in terms of growth and improvement? After all, not all change is improvement. That's right. Sometimes it is a transformation and not an improvement. And I think what we should be doing, whether it is about improvement or whether it is about transformation, what's really important is to mark out those milestones, Alan. So critically important that we make sure that people know when they are passing a point where we think that they need to be thanked and congratulated. What thanking and congratulating people does is build trust, and it reduces conflict. Not so much conflict in terms of fighting, but conflict in that we're in us being on the same page or not. So I hope that makes sense there, Alan. Thank you so much for your contribution as we've gone through there today, guys. Hey, quick apology for the sound today. I'm really sorry that didn't quite work out. I will be suitably throwing this pair of headphones out and making sure I get better ones by the time the next one comes along. Thanks heaps for being involved, guys. Had a great time working with you today, and we'll see you at the next Real Schools webinar. Bye for now.